Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson. I'm a general pediatrician and I'm the chief medical officer for SpoonfulOne. So, as you get ready for your baby, or if you've already had your baby, one of the things, of course, you'll focus on the most in early life is how you feed your baby. And what we know today is that research that's published really in the last 10 years, things have really changed. So, I have 11 and 13-year-old boys now. The way we fed my boys and the way that you get to feed your children is going to be different. And the great news on that is ultimately that you have this great opportunity to do it even better than we did. And that's because of a lot of data. And in particular, a lot of new data really surrounding protection and the prevention of food allergies. We know that really over the last 3 decades or so, each one of those decades, the number of children with food allergies here in the United States has doubled, which is almost hard to believe. So meaning that now we have about 8% of US children, or about 2 kids in every single classroom that have a food allergy, a reaction that can include hives and vomiting, even anaphylaxis as kids get older that can be life-threatening. And you probably know we have peanut-free tables and we're really focused on kind of what's in our food, which is great. But we have to get to thinking really, how is it that this happened and what can we do? And of course, the biggest modifiable risk factor we've got is how we feed our babies. And what we used to say, we now know through new research is really different. So I want to just talk really kind of like, as you are having your babies and like how you feed a baby in 2020 of really, how to approach it. So first and foremost, of course, you'll hear from obstetricians and from doulas and from lactation consultants and from pediatricians that, of course, we recommend breastfeeding. And of course, the immensity of breastfeeding is not just the nutritive value, but of course, the experience for moms. And most moms, about 90% of moms who attempt to breastfeed will be able to successfully breastfeed. But let me just tell you, as a mom who didn't get to breastfeed as long as I wanted, and didn't get to breastfeed as much as I wanted, it's not entirely intuitive and easy. But of course, any effort you make towards breastfeeding in very early life, and if you can sustain breastfeeding even past a year of life, is always going to be in a great and best interest for your baby. But formula, of course, is a really great choice too. And it's just really thinking on in early life, how do you balance that? In the first 4 months of life, babies are on a complete liquid diet. It's either breast milk, it's formula, or it's a mix of the two. And, even what formula you picked, usually there doesn't have to be a ton going into that. Most of the cow's milk-based formulas are all fine for babies. And of course, talk to your pediatrician if you think that your baby's having any challenge if you feed your baby formula. But there's really no need to kind of be aggressive even about kind of transitioning. Your baby will start to tell you that they're ready for the introduction of solid foods around the time that we recommend. There is data that suggests never feeding solid foods to babies before the age of 4 months. And the reason is that there is some evidence that shows there's an increased risk of overweight or ultimately obesity in childhood and in later life if you start feeding early. So breast milk and, supplemental vitamin D if you choose to do that, and formula are all you need right in the beginning. And then it's really like, okay, what are you going to do when it's time to start this amazing experience of feeding your baby other foods? Most babies will show you really good signs of readiness. So in my kids and lots of the patients that I've spoken to over the years, it's like babies start like you're sitting at dinner and your baby's at the table, it's on your lap, or you're just hanging out with them, and your baby's just like starting to go like sniffing, or sometimes like licking the air. Literally, babies are so cute. Like they start to smell your pizza and they're like, that smells amazing. So they start to show you that readiness. And otherwise, you really want to make sure your baby developmentally is ready. So your baby should be able to kind of sit on their own in an assisted chair. They should really be able to keep their head up really easily. And then when you're ready to choose a solid food, you get to choose which food is first. There is no data that there is a single best first food for a baby. You might be mashed up avocado. It might be cereal pureed and kind of liquefied with expressed breast milk or formula. It might be super mashed up fruit. It can be whatever you want that first feeding to be. And if it's something symbolic or culturally relevant, or what your mother or your partner's parents said was their first food and you want to emulate that, go for it. And then this is where the advice has changed. Once your baby shows that when they open their mouth and they're ready to feed and you put a spoonful of any of that food into your baby's mouth, they don't like tongue thrust it. Some babies from texture or even from flavor at first will kind of experiment because they don't really know what it is in their mouth the first time. So they might do a little spitting, but sometimes they'll just tongue thrust it out. And that means it's probably a little early. Wait a few days and try again. But once you get started, you don't need or nor should you really go slow. So the old advice about waiting specifically on foods that are common allergens, we know got us into trouble. In fact, we know that because we're alive today in this modern susceptibility, about 2 out of 3 kids with a food allergy doesn't have a parent with one, which means it's not just genetics alone. It's likely that people like me, pediatricians for the last 20 years, when we were giving the advice to say, hold off on peanut or hold off on egg, in fact, we probably increased the rates of food allergies. Now we know from research from all over the world that early introduction of things like peanut and egg, shellfish, fish, any of these different common allergens in babies' diets are good to get in early as 4 to 6 months, and then getting in routinely. So it's not just that you get peanut into your baby's diet and a little mixed up oatmeal or something when they're 5 months old. That's great. We want you to do that. The less likely a child will ever have a reaction to food if you feed it early. And if you keep it in their diet as they're growing up, their immune system is growing up too, and it's learning. And so we know that if you get all these foods into a baby's tummy, their immune system in their tummy starts to kind of have an awareness of that food and recognize, oh, there's sesame, or there's peanut, or there's almond, or there's cashew, there's egg. And once it's recognizing those food proteins while the immune system is growing up and developing, it gets more tolerized to it, or meaning it doesn't get sensitized to it and turn into an allergy. We know, for example, that the number one risk factor for developing a food allergy is not your family history, but in fact, if your baby has eczema. And about 1 in 5 babies does have eczema. And the reason being, it's thought that if babies have little fractures in their skin or kind of broken down or dry skin, that in the world, there's all sorts of peanut dust even here on my desk. And if it's been in my house or I'm at a grocery store or even a friend's house, that you can get exposed to the foods through the skin. And that tends to be more sensitizing. So it's really important that babies, particularly those babies with eczema, get introduced to all the different common food allergens early in life, but then that you keep them in the diet every day or at least every week a few times, because you want that immune system to keep seeing all those different foods. So let's say you're starting with avocado and then you start with banana, or you choose a cereal. Once you've started a few foods, you might feel more and more comfortable. Maybe you'll introduce some cashew butter, or maybe you'll introduce some peanut butter. Maybe you'll introduce, little bits of egg baked into, a bread product or something. And then once you do that, what we want to make sure of is that you get all those foods in regularly and easily. And that's where, we created in some ways SpoonfulOne. So SpoonfulOne is an inspired, basically scientific inspired solution to say, we know mom and dads are busy. We know they're a little bit confused about all these different foods. And frankly, we know they're scared about these foods. I mean, I think of anything I know from parents, even during the COVID pandemic, people are kind of more hesitant than ever. But we know, in fact, that you don't want to introduce honey until your baby's a year. That's one of the kind of off-limits foods. And you want to make sure that the textures of foods are safe. So a lot of people love to think about baby-led weaning, the concept where you're not just giving baby foods, but you're letting your baby really do a lot of self-feeding as early as 4, 5, 6 months, which is great. And making sure that, it's not too sticky or it's not too big from a choking risk standpoint. But after that, every single food is fair game. But you have to be intentional in some ways. Like, I don't want you to eat a food and then wait a few more days before you introduce another one. If your child's ever going to have a reaction to a food, it's going to be within 2 hours if it's actually an allergic reaction. So you can introduce a food at breakfast and you can introduce another different food at the dinner time meal. And not all babies, when you first start feeding, you'll probably have just one meal a day where your baby's having solid foods and you'll be breastfeeding or bottle feeding in between. And then you'll see as they start to show lots of interest and smell the air and love the food, you want to share your family meals with them, little bits of the things that you're eating in age kind of, appropriate textures, because your baby gets encouraged into all those flavors. We know that the palate, for example, you can kind of create a sweet tooth in a child. You can create a little bit of salt tooth. You never want to add added sugar, never sprinkle sugar. You don't even need to sprinkle any kind of sweetener in your food. You never need to use spices, and you certainly don't need to use salt. Babies have probably 2 to 3 times the amount of taste buds that you and I do. So if you and I ate a little bite of bread and our baby ate a little bite of bread, that baby is getting taste explosion, and you and I are just kind of eating bread. It's why, as we get older, we eat a lot more spicy food because we don't have as many taste buds left. So your baby doesn't need extra, flavor enhancers in any way, but you do want to get them introduced to all different foods. So including those allergens because of flavor preferences and primarily because of this kind of immune exposure. So, I'm the chief medical officer of SpoonfulOne, and SpoonfulOne was created by a world-leading pediatric allergist. She runs the allergy center at Stanford. 5, and she's been taking care of kids with food allergies for decades. And she was tired of really the reality that now all of a sudden we're saying to parents, don't hold off and get all these foods in and get them in all the time. And that was kind of overwhelming and also somewhat inconvenient. There's data, for example, in a study called the EAT trial, where in the United Kingdom and England, they basically tried to have moms introduce 6 different common allergens early. So sesame and cod and egg and milk and wheat and peanut, and they basically tried to have moms feed those at least a couple of times a day every single week. And only about 30-40% of the moms could do it, even in a research trial, and that was just 6 common foods. So SpoonfulOne was devised off of a set of research that was conducted out of Stanford that looked at babies as young as 4 months of age and up to school age kids that fed on either single foods every single day, like just peanut protein every day, or just a couple foods every day, or a combination of all different foods together. And then she drew blood on all those babies and children about a year later and looked at what are called their biomarkers to see, did their immune systems change? And indeed, the kids that were eating a combination of all those different foods had a really different what's called a biomarker or blood profile. And so kind of inspired the creation of SpoonfulOne. So SpoonfulOne is a combination of 16 different foods. So tree nuts, peanut, egg, milk, wheat, soy, and then the hard stuff to get in a baby's diet. Fish, so cod and salmon, and even shellfish like shrimp, which is the most common allergy in older life. And it's really at this kind of precise measured level that was found in the study to really change the immune system. So not a lot of protein that would be, so it's really safe for a large population of babies, and certainly enough though that the immune system can kind of see it. So SpoonfulOne is designed to be in the earliest feedings, dissolvable into a bottle. So at 4 months of age, you can sprinkle it into a bottle once a day. You can sprinkle it into pureed, mashed up avocado or peach or pear or whatever some of your baby's favorite foods are. And then you can introduce all these foods. So peanut and egg and different, milk products and things into your baby's diet early in the table foods, knowing full well that each and every day that you're using SpoonfulOne, you're also getting all those different food proteins and that protein diversity into your baby's stomach at large. And so that's why SpoonfulOne was created. My job, is to kind of translate that information for families. You don't want to delay this food. I don't want you to be scared of food. There's no reason to be scared of food. Although we know food allergies are common, we know that the number one way that you as a mom or you as a parent or dad or grandmother, anybody who's listening, the way that you're going to help decrease the likelihood that a baby who's born around this time doesn't develop a food allergy is to make sure you're getting all these different food proteins into that baby's tummy each and every day as best you can as their immune system is kind of growing up during what we call the critical periods of development in infancy and then even into toddlerhood. SpoonfulOne is because the study that was used to create SpoonfulOne conducted at Stanford studied babies and children for a year. We recommend using it for a year. So as your baby kind of goes through the throes of food introduction, some days kids love solid food, the next day they don't. And in toddlerhood, the kind of food battles happen. So if you can start as early as 4 to 6 months, you're training that immune system early and ideally keeping on it for a year. And that's why there's different forms of SpoonfulOne. So this, for example, has the exact same amount of protein from these different foods, but this is a pack of puffs. So you can feed a child a pack of puffs each and every day. They get the same 16 foods in the same precisely measured amount. So after 6 months, if baby's doing a lot of self-feeding, it's another way to do it. So SpoonfulOne was really created to kind of help make this easy and just help make it so that parents can get all these foods in, not be scared of feeding. In fact, an independent trial studied over 700 babies out of Northwestern University feeding SpoonfulOne at home. And for all these babies, they were on a placebo in one group and in the intervention in the other. It was a non-event. Babies didn't have any challenges with it. Moms watched their babies after that. If, for example, though, your baby has high risk with eczema, you can talk to your pediatrician. And in the rare case that a baby has already developed a food allergy later in infancy or even early in life, not most allergies aren't created or seen before 6 months, thank goodness, but some are. And if they were reacted to a very low level, you might see a reaction, and then you can go to a pediatric allergist just like you would with any other food. But the good news is because of how SpoonfulOne was created with those small levels of protein, we know we want to train the immune system, but not necessarily also provoke it in that way. way. So I think what I'll do, I'm going to go to this chat function if I can do that, and I can take any questions about SpoonfulOne. And Stace, I know one of my colleagues is supporting me. I'm just text me if I can help. I can't necessarily see the chat. When I hit chat, I don't go to any other spot, but just that's kind of SpoonfulOne. You can go to SpoonfulOne.com. You can certainly learn more about our research trials. You can click on those 2 different trials. You can see some videos from our founder, Dr. Kari Nadeau, and certainly order. It's available on Amazon or on SpoonfulOne.com. And Stace, if you want to text me, I just I don't see any chats. Let me just see. Oh, here we go. Okay, here we go on the stage. All right. So let's see. Someone, if you want to ask me a question right now, I'll see it right away. Any recommendations about celiac? So yeah, it's a great question. Celiac and gluten intolerance are very different. So when you have a food allergy, you have what's called an IgE mediated food allergy. What that means is there's an immunoglobulin or what's called an antibody called IgE. And when a child or an adult develops a food allergy, the immune system kind of goes off, the what are called B cells, kick out these IgEs that basically mistakenly identify the protein in food as a threat. When it comes to celiac disease and gluten intolerance in that way, that's an autoimmune condition that causes basically a lack of some of the protective kind of immune recognition in the lining of the GI tract. So it's different. Unfortunately, early feeding of wheat is not known to protect against something like celiac disease, but it is known to protect against something called IgE-mediated food allergies or common food allergies that you see. The 16 foods are listed on the website on SpoonfulOne.com. I'm just seeing some of your questions here. But of course, they cover all the 9 food groups responsible for 90% of the food allergies in children. So it's the tree nuts, it's peanut, it's egg, milk, wheat, soy, and oat, and even our little logo includes all of these in here, but you can look at it on the website and you can kind of go through all those. Would you introduce SpoonfulOne in period foods at 4 months? I would, if your baby's showing readiness. I mean, number one, I want you to feel a sense of freedom. I want you to feed your babies all the foods that you guys feed in your households and your family loves to eat. And we don't want you to go slow. Babies at 4 months are ready to do that, and they'll pace themselves on volume. They'll turn their head when they're done eating and things. But you getting in all different foods, and including, something like SpoonfulOne ensures that you're getting all those different proteins in really early, and also that you kind of cover all your bases. But I want you to introduce those real table foods into your baby's diet as well, because I don't want you to ultimately be scared of foods. We know that it's babies who don't get these foods early in life that are at higher risk for developing food allergies. I mean, fortunately, most babies don't develop food allergies, of course, but the problem is that sometimes it can be kind of a lightning strike in a family that would otherwise never see it coming, and we want you to protect it. And again, number one risk factor is eczema. So if you've got a baby or you have a baby who has broken down skin, working with your pediatrician on making sure you create what's called a skin barrier with good emollients on that baby's skin. And then those kids, more than any other kids, we want to get all these different common food allergens into those tummies really early and repeatedly through all of infancy, so that as they're growing up, their tummy's learning about all those common allergens through the tummy and not necessarily through the skin that can come in through that broken down skin barrier. So yeah, and someone's just asking a question. 4 to 6 months is when you want to start introduction to common allergens. You do not want to wait. So pediatrician advice, for example, when I went into practice in 2006, way back when, we were telling families to hold off on those foods. And during that time that we did that, food allergies continued to rise. Big, huge, very important study published in 2015 took babies with eczema or already identified egg allergy. They fed them peanut at least 3 times a week, all the way from the time that these babies were as young as 4 months of age, all the way till they were 60 months or 5 years of age and went off to kindergarten. And when they constantly were feeding them peanut all throughout their development, those kids were more than 80% less likely to develop a peanut allergy compared to the kids that were in the control group and didn't get any of that peanut early. So we know without question, you do not want to wait until 1. In fact, there's a study out of Canada called the CHILD study that even standard risk kids, kids without eczema, if their moms and dads didn't introduce peanut by the time they were a year, they were 4 times more likely to develop a peanut allergy than the kids that got peanut early. So you don't want to delay. If you've got family allergy, if you've got family history of allergies in your family, you want to be really intentional about this, and you can work with your pediatrician. But I'll tell you, if anything I've learned in the last 2.5 years, and a study that was just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, we know that about 2/3 of pediatricians aren't talking to parents about getting these foods in early and often. They're saying, oh yeah, don't hold off on peanut. But peanut's only 7% of food allergies in children and adults combined. So what we need to do is say, there's a universal mechanism. Unfortunately, when you eat peanut, you don't protect against egg allergy. When you eat egg, you don't protect against cashew allergy. You just protect against that individual protein that the immune system sees on that little molecular level. So we want parents to feel really free to get all these foods into their baby's diet. And I'll tell you, if anything, I've learned working with SpoonfulOne, coming out of academic medicine and spending a lot of my career talking about vaccines and other things, that, the baby food stores, like the baby foods that are in the aisles today, aren't diverse. They're not full of these different proteins. And that's part of why Dr. Nadeau founded SpoonfulOne, was to get all these different foods into baby foods and into the baby foods aisles so that it's easy for families to do this and you don't feel overwhelmed. I'm a full-time mom worker. I've always been. And when I had both of my babies, I did not make my baby's own baby food. I mashed up stuff and I shared my baby's diet, but I didn't make my own baby food. So I really did rely on what baby foods were available on the shelf. And this time, we didn't have these products. So I'm lucky that, of course, my babies did not develop a food allergy and haven't up to this time. They're 11 and 13, and, we can develop food allergies at any time in our lives because we know there's probably this modern susceptibility. But, I really think that, as moms, I want you to feel free to enjoy foods, to one of the things we do as a parent and, I've learned as a pediatrician, even from families I've been able to care for. Feeding our babies is like the best. Feeding my 13-year-old is one of the best things I still love to do. So I want families to just feel a sense of freedom. I think, pediatricians like me, we were wrong when we gave the advice to hold off on these foods, and we kind of medicalized feeding. We made feeding scary, and feeding doesn't need to be scary. And, the hope is that SpoonfulOne kind of gives you a passport, and that all of a sudden, when you're feeding SpoonfulOne every day, you can take comfort that you're getting all those proteins into your baby's diet, and then you can get them into the table foods as well. And you can go out to restaurants, and when we ever get to go out to restaurants again, and incorporate them there too. So I know Stacy, who I work with at SpoonfulOne, is answering questions here. I'm just going to scan it real quick and then I'll sign off. So there's a little time before the next sessions, but let me just see if I can find any others, or if there's something you guys don't think I've asked, maybe plop it in the bottom here again as a new comment, and I'll try to answer it too. You can find me. So, I'm a general pediatrician. I'm on Instagram as Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson. I'm on Facebook, and my blog is wendysueswanson.com. So I'm or drwendysueswanson.com, whatever. I'm all over the internet. I've been writing and communicating about science, vaccines, feeding, sleep, everything for, over 10 years, and have lots of content as well. So I care deeply about prevention. Get your babies and get your flu shot if you're in your third trimester of pregnancy. Babies get a flu shot after 6 months. And, in the time with COVID and everything else right now, of course, we can't do anything better right now than these hygiene measures of wearing a mask and taking care of everyone. So thanks for saying the talk was nice. I'm glad. I hope it was really helpful. And, would you recommend it since her daddy has, shellfish allergies? So great question. When you have a family history of food allergies, your baby's at a slight risk of increased risk for food allergies. Again, eczema is the number one risk factor. And second to that is particularly if you have two family members with a food allergy. So if dad's got a shellfish allergy, without question, I would work on making sure you get these foods in. SpoonfulOne was designed to be in houses with people with food allergies. This is a really thick foil pack. So dad could open it up and give it to baby. Dad could open this up and sprinkle into baby. Very unlikely he'd have any trouble, even with the shellfish allergy himself. But another family member could give SpoonfulOne if you chose to use SpoonfulOne. But getting those foods in early when there's a family history is super, super important. So thanks for all your comments. Follow up if you want on my own site, or go to SpoonfulOne.com. And thanks again to Prego Expo for converting to this virtual format. I'm so glad you're educating parents all over. And thanks so much for having me.